2, 1.
Good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone that's joined us. Thanks for participating. Today, I'm joined by Stefan and Corey. My name is Eric Spire. I'm the Director of Sales for Bluewater Books and Charts. We're going to discuss IMO 2021 cybersecurity compliance. You know, what that means for people in all different facets of the industry. We'd like to thank everybody for coming back for our second try at this. We had a bit of technical difficulty. The irony, it's not lost on us, and we're about to talk about some really technical things, but we think we ironed everything out on our end. So we really do appreciate everybody's patience. This is a live stream, and we are going to be monitoring the live chat within YouTube and Facebook. So if you have questions, please let us know, and we'll do our best to answer them. So with that, let's get started. I'll just give you a little bit of background on what I do, and then I'll let Corey and Stefan do the same thing. As I said, I'm Eric Spire. I act as the Director of Sales for Bluewater Books and Charts here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We specialize in bridge navigation and compliance for vessels of all sizes, from providing paper pubs and charts to really more high-end professional equipment used to update ecdices and kind of keep vessels secure. We also act as the primary distributor of arms on the cyber side. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Corey Ranslum of International Maritime Security Associates and let him tell you guys what he does.
Hey, Eric, thanks. It's great to be joined by both you and Stefan today after our technical issues last week. But, you know, welcome to live video. Welcome to live television. We really appreciate everybody joining us from all around the world. Make sure, as Eric said in the chat, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook, you post any questions or comments. We are recording this, so we will be then putting this back out on our social media. So if you have friends and colleagues who couldn't join us today, there'll be a video post of this back out on social media pretty shortly. As Eric said, my name's Corey Ranslum. I'm the CEO here at International Maritime Security Associates. We are a global maritime security firm providing a number of security solutions to the maritime industry. We have cybersecurity solutions. As Eric mentioned, our ARM software platform is an award-winning platform that provides critical information to mariners at sea, wherever they are in the world. And we also have some regulatory compliance solutions for vessels and facilities. We have a ton of great experience here at the company and are able to help you guys when it comes to cyber, when it comes to getting critical information or regulatory compliance. So just appreciate being a part of this with Eric and Stefan today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Stefan Leipold with START. We do internet and cybersecurity and IT infrastructure design in Europe, in the United States, and in Asia since 1998. And START also implements the magnetic privacy screens for Apple and Microsoft devices to enhance privacy.
Thanks for that from both of you guys. Sounds like we've got quite a qualified panel here. With that, I'll kind of start out with just a broad overview. Corey, if you could kind of give us an idea of what IMO 2021 really entails. I understand it's a pretty detailed set of instructions, but can you kind of give us just a top-down look on what that looks like moving forward?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. So that's actually, the reason why we're here today is to kind of walk people through these regulations from the IMO perspective, but also then working down to the individual countries and flag states. So with that, back in 2017, the International Maritime Organization passed Resolution MSC 428/98, which was the implementation of what we know as the IMO 2021 cybersecurity regulation. So it's pretty interesting. This is something that the IMO has been working on for a number of years, and as everybody or anybody who sees how the IMO operates knows that they do not move at a very rapid pace when it comes to regulations, but now we're at the point of implementation. So with that, the regulations are pushed forward by the IMO, and then that goes down to the flag states, and then from there to the individual countries, port state control. So there's a number of things that I know in the coming hour with this we're going to go over, but we wanted to start out by framing out the discussion with that. And really, the IMO 2021 takes a lot of what they've put together from the NIST standards. There's a number of standards if you look at the documents that are referenced, but they take a number of pieces from that NIST standard. And again, this is something throughout the next hour that we're going to go through. So as we do, like I said, if you guys have questions, make sure in the chat you push those questions forward to us.
Thanks for that, Corey. I guess a good kind of place to start, especially from the vessel side, is to maybe hear from Stefan about, what are some of the really common vulnerabilities, some of the easier things to tackle, and really, what kind of stuff, could all boats look out for as something, that really affects everybody?
The most common things that we have seen is that client or non-client facing investments like server, firewall, they're actually considered not really necessary. You can have a very expensive vessel, but you have a $50 router to secure the entire boat. Or if the boat is inside in a marina, it connects to an insecure Wi-Fi, which everybody has access to, and you can intercept as an individual everybody's traffic. And you can even do worse and get to the systems of the boat if they're connected to the network as well. And interestingly, Corey, that you mentioned this, and their compliance not only in the marine industry, also if you run a hotel business or if you're in HIPAA compliance and medical business, it says like critical systems have to have, let's say, a firewall. You have to auto lock the screen, and so there are certain requirements that needs to be met. And most of them actually go back, if you're an IT guy, to common sense that you don't get anybody access and encryptions, and these are the things that we actually missing in marinas right now.
That's interesting. From my standpoint, I get on a lot of bridges and I see an awful lot of passwords written on Post-it notes stuck to computers. So that's also probably something that's pretty easy to do away with. So it sounds like you're really talking about threats from both sides, both internal and external. Is there a piece of that you feel boats should focus on more, or is it, you need to kind of attack that problem from both sides?
I think both sides are equally important. I think once the vessel is not in a marina, everything should be secured. And even if you are in a marina, either have your own portable hotspot that people actually can connect to, or if you are actually connected to the marina's Wi-Fi, the marina should also be safe. And if it is not safe, you might want to limit the way you use your business, or you want to encrypt and use a VPN before you do any kind of business. But you should make sure whatever you send out over anybody's network, that it's not your own and not secure, that it's not sensitive.
Sure, that makes sense. Corey, can you kind of maybe get into a little bit more about what your team does in sort of how you go about doing these assessments, kind of the step one from your side? If the vessel says, hey, look, we really want to, know what our vulnerabilities are and assess our risk levels, what's the steps they should take? What should they expect from you or someone else that would come on board and offer services like that?
Sure, Eric, that's a great question. And we work pretty closely with Stefan and his team when it comes to the cybersecurity for shipboard operations. So we have kind of step-by-step and hand-in-hand of how we work together. And everything we do, like I mentioned with the IMO compliance, is really based on the NIST standard. And IMO mentions this basically in 5 words: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So that's kind of where we start. And the starting point, and again, whether you work with us or you have another cyber security company that you work with, number one, we always recommend that you conduct an assessment of your vessel's critical network infrastructure. And we recommend that you do not use an internal or an IT company that set this network up, that's put your network together or really understands your network. It's a good idea to look at an outside cybersecurity company, a company that specifically concentrates on cybersecurity, but also vessels are set up much different than facilities. So take a look at and try to find a trusted partner There's a number of great companies out there. Some of them we're partnered up with, some of them we're not, but a number of good companies out there around the world that can come on and pretty cost effectively provide you the assessment. And to us, that's really the first step, is to get an assessment of your shipboard network so you have an idea of where your vulnerabilities are. And the reason you want the outside company to come in and do that is they don't really have an idea of the intricacies of how the network is set up. So it's a really great idea to have that third party unbiased view. Once you do that, then work with the company to take a look at those vulnerabilities. And there's a lot of things, and from the work that we've done, once we do that assessment, that we like to then work hand in hand with the vessel's ETO and the vessel's IT provider, or if we're working with a maritime facility, with the facility's IT provider, to look at how you can close some of the gaps in those vulnerabilities. So we like to really try to look at working with the IT companies, the ETO, because we found that once the assessment is done, there's really a number of things that either the ETO or the IT company that you already have on retainer can take care of. Then once we get through some of that, there are some things we found with different clients, and Stefan can speak to this as well, that we look at then what are some of the things we need to do from the cyber perspective. How can we take a look at, how's the firewall configured? What configuration do you have on your network routers? And then again, be able to work with what's the setup on that and who has access to what and how you allow access to that. So there's a number of things we go through and try to do is to close those gaps and vulnerabilities. And then once that's done, our next recommendation is typically to have some type of real-time monitoring of your critical network systems or real-time monitoring of the firewall. And again, that's usually not difficult to do. It's typically not that expensive if you are working with a company that understands, the shipboard setup, so that you can then monitor to make sure everything stays updated. Make sure that if there's any critical threats or attempts on your network, that you're alerted by that and it's shut down. It's going to be interesting to see as this plays out how the major global insurance companies are going to be looking at these regulations and how vessels and facilities mitigate it. Right now, if you talk to, some of the major insurance brokers and underwriters, there's just not coverage that's really available to protect a vessel from cybersecurity related attacks. We have great relationships with a lot of those companies around the world and talk to those folks almost on a weekly basis to be able to put plans and programs together to help vessels. And that for us is really important. Sure, the regulation side is important, but what can we do to protect the vessel so that if your owner comes on board and needs to get involved with some critical work items, that he's not vulnerable to attack on the boat, that he's just as secure and many times hopefully more secure than he would be on land. And one of the things that I forgot to mention at the beginning, Eric, was as part of this whole IMO 2021, one of the things that they want vessels to do is once you get through this assessment, look at the vulnerabilities, they want you then to take this information to put how are you dealing with cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities into your overall safety management system, which is part of your ISM plan. So if you're a vessel that has a full ISM plan, or you have an ISM plan that is that you're doing voluntarily with your flag state by your first inspection of after January 1st of 2021, you'll need to have cybersecurity as part of that. So I just wanted to mention that that's kind of the big piece of the IMO 2021, the 42898, is that you need to have cyber as part of that. But it, like I said, it always starts with that assessment.
I think that's a really good point that I just want to re-highlight that you just said, Corey, because it's something I've heard is maybe a bit of a misconception in the industry, but even voluntary ISM vessels, if they have ISM, are subject to these regulations. That's a really important point to know, because I know, at least, from our side, we deal with a lot of privately operated vessels, and they're not necessarily thinking that they have to follow the same standards as the commercial vessels. I wanted to kind of follow up here because I hear a lot from both of you guys about sort of the internal side of the vessel, and then the facility side. And, you know, from my understanding, vessels, super yachts, or even commercial boats, they have a limited amount of facilities they can go to. There's just a limited amount of infrastructure in the world that can handle vessels that size. So to some extent, they don't have any control over the facility aspect. Is it enough for them if they really do, you know, their full diligence to secure the onboard network? Can they feel safe in any facility worldwide? And if not, is there something that the facilities can provide to let them know, you know, here's what we've done from our end?
So I'll take the first part of that question, because I think it's a great question. I'm not going to speak of any facility specifically, but the majority of the facilities that I've seen, and I know Stefan has interesting stories on this as well. The majority of the facilities I've seen are not secure when it comes to specifically to the large yacht operations. I've been to a number of facilities. We've been able to take a look at the network, and on the public side, we've been able to see every vessel that's connected into that network, whether it's Wi-Fi or whether they're hard connected in, and that's a huge vulnerability. And there's some easy steps that you can take to mitigate that. So as you connect to a network, if you can see a whole bunch of other vessels on that network, usually to me that's kind of the first red flag that the facility probably doesn't have any or very little cybersecurity on that. And I was actually just talking to a facility the other day that's one of our clients, and we were talking about that is what's that third party liability, that if I'm providing internet access as a marina or as a shipyard to all the vessels in my facility, and then there's an attack that comes in through that network connection, what's my liability? And a lot of times the insurance companies will not cover a marina's third party liability if they don't have some of the basic protections in place, or that coverage could be completely exempted in certain forms. So you want to make sure, and it's always a great question, you know, as you pointed out, Eric, to ask the facility what kind of cybersecurity protections do they have in place on the network. And just like everything else, you know, when you look at a facility, you know, what kind of fencing does the facility have? Lighting? Do they have CCTV cameras? Is it access controlled? Are there security guards? And along with all the physical stuff, you want to ask, hey, what's your cybersecurity protection in place? How are you protecting my vessel? Because vessels go to great lengths, especially private yachts, to protect that asset, to protect people from boarding. But if you're not doing the basic protection from a cybersecurity perspective, it's just like opening the door and letting anybody on board. So that's always a big question, and don't hesitate to, you know, to ask the facility what type of protection they have in place.
All right, I'd like to pick up on a couple of points you made. And when companies say, yeah, we have an IT guy, the difference between a cybersecurity company and an IT guy is actually, if you put it in layman terms, you hire the IT guy to set up your infrastructure and make it safe. Cybersecurity, a hacker philosophy is only if you understand the system to its full, it can be manipulated. So the hacker basically comes in, tries to break your system and finds the vulnerabilities. It can be outdated firmware or anything. And when it comes to marina, a few months ago, a marina was actually hacked and had a security breach. And to our surprise, I made an assessment of the marina, and that had changed nothing. So once we were actually getting access to that network, we could see printers, office computers, vessels, everything was on one network. And the biggest misunderstanding is when a company says, oh, we have a cybersecurity insurance, that actually means what? Because does it cover your cost to recover your data? Does it cover the ransom? Or even worse, does it cover liability because you lost your client's information and the client has a financial loss and files a lawsuit? So that's one important part that you have to look into if you get a cybersecurity company. And I think it should be enforced that the marinas and the vessels have to have the same security and have to educate their staff, because staff changes. So you have to repeatedly educate people and follow guidelines and policies, and you have to have a camera system. You have to have access to the building that is secured. You need to know when, who, what is happening. And an important part is also, I have seen vessels where, yes, they had a firewall. It was just not connected. So they literally bypassed everything with the $50 router. And even worse, the navigation system computer, which is running on Windows 7, which is an end-of-life system, so there's no more patches for vulnerabilities, should not be on any network for security reasons. And while we were actually on the bridge, somebody connected with TeamViewer to this computer, and it should not be that way at all. So there could be huge harm done to the vessel and the entire infrastructure.
Thanks, Stefan. This is probably a good time to ask one of our viewer questions is, really how common are these attacks on vessels? How often do you guys see them? I mean, I know from our standpoint, the industry being what it is, they're not always reported. But can you kind of give us an overview of how big of a risk this really is?
There's obviously nobody saying from the big guys I got hacked. If you compare to big corporations, right? These corporations, when they say they just got hacked, it somehow leaks to the news over a couple of months of time. What I can tell you, and actually today my article about this is actually published, and this year the increase of cybersecurity attacks is by 400% and $8 trillion damage to the U.S. infrastructure alone. So I'm pretty sure it's a huge amount that actually got hacked, but also it comes with high-profile individuals, like certain people have their accounts hacked and their personal pictures leaked to the internet. Obviously, these people will not put themselves out there saying, "I just lost everything," etc. So I think the number is high, but people will not speak about it.
Yeah, that kind of tracks. We hear glimpses of that in the industry every now and then. And it's certainly, a bit of a taboo subject, but it's also a very important subject. Certainly the IMO has said so at this point, and, vessels should be aware. And I think one thing we see sometimes too is, in a lot of times, the commercial and the yacht side, we have a lot of crew changeover. And sometimes things don't always get followed up on from that standpoint. And I think it's also just back to Corey's original point that it's really important that you have a third-party outside person or company that's sort of dedicated to this, because they can kind of follow over the life of the vessel or the facility and help them out. I'd like to kind of switch gears for a second.
Hey, can I just jump in real quick on this one?
Sure.
Hey, so we've seen, and as we've looked at different types of vessels around the world, there have been it's almost constant when it comes to potential attacks or attacks on vessels. I mean, we see it on a constant basis. We were working with a partner that was looking at a very large cargo ship, and they said, "Hey, our ships and systems are secure. See what you can find." And we were able to get all the way into the ballast control systems of the ship, and we could have reballasted the ship without them even knowing. So there's a number of vulnerabilities. There was a tanker that went aground. It was a Japanese flag tanker, the Wakashio, back on July 25th, that went aground in the Mauritius. There's a number of people in the maritime industry now that believe that was actually due to some type of a cyber attack. There's not a lot of evidence you can find of that right now, but they were way off course. When they ran hard aground, the ship broke up 4,000 metric tons of oil into the ocean, so a huge environmental disaster. So there are attacks on vessels that are more frequent. Most cybersecurity experts believe just in the last year alone that attacks on the maritime industry, vessels, and maritime infrastructure has gone up over 900%. And these are state and non-state actors. And right now there's very few companies or organizations across the spectrum in the maritime industry that I know of who have not been subject to some sort of cyber attack or attempted cyber attack. So this is the new frontier of attacks, because you don't have to go to a faraway place. You can do this from, right where you're at, and there's a lot you can access. And I think in the maritime industry, there's a lot we need to do to kind of button things up to be able to protect ourselves, whether it's the shipboard side or the shore side.
Yeah, that's interesting, Corey. I think your ballast water example is almost literally the exact plot of the 1995 movie Hackers, and that was supposed to be a fictionalized thing, and here we are seeing that in real life. I think that's a good segue because, you know, certainly we can talk all day about the risks and try to convince people that they have to change. But can we talk briefly about the regulation side of this? You know, so certainly the boats have to do this, but also, you know, it's going to be enforced by flag state, by port state, all around the world. And I know that you guys, you know, have some connections there and have heard some information on what their plans are next year. So maybe you could share some of that with us.
Sure, Eric, and that's really the big part of the IMO is the IMO puts out these resolutions that go forward to the individual countries, and then through the countries' flags, that's how the enforcement happens. So these laws are made by the individual countries. So what we've done is we've been in contact with all of the major flag states around the world and have a full library of what they're looking at. And there's a lot of similarities when you look at the major flag states, but we've also had a number of conversations here in the United States with the U.S. Coast Guard about port state control and what that looks like with vessels coming into the United States. And as we get into 2021, you're going to start to see a lot of this roll out. So if we look at just some of the major flag states, so let's take the MCA, the Maritime Coast Guard Agency of the UK, and what everybody kind of refers to as the Red Ensign Group. They're following a standard that was put forth by the MCA called the MIN 647 standard. And this is basically how the MCA plus the Red Ensign Group is expecting vessels to comply with the IMO 2021. So it puts forward what they're looking for with that flag. So if you're a Red Ensign flag, that's your kind of key document that you want to look at to be sure that your ISM plan is in compliance with your flag. If you take a look at the Jamaica flag is following right along with the Red Ensign Group and the MIN 647 standard. So if you're a Jamaica flag, that is also going to be applicable to you. The Marshall Islands, the Marshall Islands flag has a number of guiding documents. This is also available on their website as well. Again, very similar to what the MCA has put forward. So you can find that, or again, you can reach out to us here at IMSA and we can help you as far as get through that and how the ISM plan should be put together. So in the large yacht industry, those are kind of the three main flags. If you look at the cargo and the cruise industry and some of the larger flags around the world, the standards by the flags are very similar. And each one of the flags that we've gone through so far references that NIST standard, which is a fairly comprehensive document that's in version 2 right now. And so you can boil it down to really a couple of points, and again, we can help you put that together. The other interesting piece of this is going to be port state control, and you mentioned that. So the Coast Guard has actually put out public guidance on what they call WI 027, and this document lays out how the Coast Guard port state is going to take a look at IMO 2021 compliance. So once you have the certification from your flag state that you're in compliance with IMO 2021, that's something that the Coast Guard is going to be inspecting when your vessel comes into the United States. And I would be willing to bet that the number of port state control boardings on vessels, and not just large yachts, but the cargo lines and the cruise lines over the next year or two is probably going to increase exponentially. So the Coast Guard ensures that the vessels coming into the United States are in compliance with IMO 2021. And we're also starting to see this roll out into some of the other port state control MOUs around the world. We have a whole library of data and information that we've been pulling together on that. It's just huge, and it would take us a whole entire, probably, 5-hour live YouTube event to get through all the nuances of that. So if you're going to be in other port state control regions, you want to understand the nuances that they're looking at. And there was been a lot of media that's gone out that said, hey, the Coast Guard is going to start enforcing this right away on January 1st. They're going to start doing boardings and looking for this. And I've talked to a number of people in the Coast Guard unofficially, and it just doesn't seem like the Coast Guard is going to be dropping the hammer at midnight on January 1st on port state control. The Coast Guard wants to be able to work with the vessels and facilities to make sure that everybody understands the regulations and is in compliance. And one of the things is the Coast Guard, like I said, has a checklist out there, and it's pretty easy to go through. As you do the assessment on the boat, your cybersecurity company should be aware of those port state control checklists and what they're going to do, because to me, that's really part of the assessment. And one of the interesting things you mentioned, Eric, is, hey, is the username and password of the ECDIS or the navigation system or critical computer systems or servers, is it taped right on the device? And that's one of the number one items on the checklist that the Coast Guard, under their port state control work instruction, put out there to their inspectors. So it's going to be interesting to see, you know, boats starting to pull all those tags off of the computers and servers of the username and passwords. But that's one of the things that they put in the work instruction in their actual guidance to the port state is, hey, start to look for some of these things. So what's kind of the idea of the cyber health on board?
So it's, you know, you've used a lot of words and specific references to documents, which reminds me of, you know, maybe legal precedents and stuff like that. And, you know, for me as a layman, I have a background in programming to some extent, but, you know, some of this is still over my head. But, you know, obviously you need professionals involved to kind of distill this information for you. But I'm wondering, Stefan, if you can kind of give us a general overview of these NIST standards, maybe in layman's terms, so at least vessels can understand, you know, when you go on board, or the facility when you go on board, what you're really trying to implement. Because, you know, from what I've heard, you know, what people say is, well, what are these actual concrete things you're doing? Yeah, okay, so you install a firewall, but, you know, how's the standard for that made? And yeah, can you kind of drill down into that a little bit so maybe we can understand better?
Okay, so it's supposed to there's an extreme echo. It's supposed to be more, if you look at compliance, there's a checklist. Let's say you have 20 different steps. One is that your firewall needs to be configured, not just having a firewall, it's on a allow basis only. So years ago, all the firewalls were open, and then you close the ports that you don't want to have. Now everything is closed and you open up what you need, and it's only on need basis. So you're not just opening everything up. Then the computers that are essential needs to auto-lock. The passwords needs to be secure, like lowercase, uppercase, symbols, long. You need to have a documentation in place that is secured, not just printed out inside and taped on the wall with all IP addresses and all passwords. The software and the firmware of the devices needs to be up to date. You need to segregate your network. That means your staff's supposed to have one network only. And if you start a network discovery on a network, you're not supposed to see anybody else on this network except for a guest network or your staff network, or then you have essential controls network. So it's pretty much the same thing, that you have access only on a need-to-know basis, and that when you go into a marina, that you also not exposing your vessel's information towards the marina. So everything is segregated on need-to-know basis to whoever needs it. And passwords also need to be changed over time. A lot of times we see that they have one password for everything, and this one password stays until somebody changes or forgets the password.
That makes sense. I've got kind of one more question for you guys, and then, you know, certainly we'd like to hear questions from the audience if there are any. But, you know, part of my job really revolves around the electronic charting side on vessels. And certainly in the past, let's say 2 years, there's been a big push from the manufacturers of ECDIS and those technologies from, hey, listen, don't connect your computers to the network. You know, they're safe if they're not connected to the network. Surely that remains true today. But they're really saying, you know, hey, we have these new systems, connect them to the network. It's easier to update. You know, from my understanding of running a bridge, it's very nice to be able to press a button and download your chart corrections and have them upload to the ECDIS. Certainly, the more complexity we add to these vessels and systems, the more there's a need for the cybersecurity risk. But it seems to me like there's two things that are at odds here. You've got captain's crew and the companies that are building these systems saying, open it up more. It's easier if we can remote in. I'll fully admit I use TeamViewer on vessels all the time. It's a really handy tool. So how do we kind of balance the need for increased technology to allow vessels to run smoother with the obvious, pitfalls that's a big security risk?
I learned an interesting term in this country, and it is actually, it takes a smart guy or a moron to screw things up. So if you have a computer that is outdated and you're not connecting it to a network, right? And somebody comes with a memory stick and the memory stick contains a virus, you still infect the computer. So I think it's back to on the need basis only. If you need to have access to a specific computer via TeamViewer or whatever it is, then at this point, somebody should be on site, enabling the access, get the work done, make sure everything is up to date, and you just close the door. It's similar to your house. Once you need to get stuff done, you just close the door and enable the alarm system again. So having everything open, it's great, it's convenient, but understanding that these boats not only have the navigation systems, they have streaming systems on board, like sonars, they have TV in every single room. So it's literally a swimming multimedia IT platform. And so having everything open, also, if it would be on the same network, enables a lot of different kinds of threats. While you don't know if your sonar system has a software bug where people can get in, people hacking DVR systems all the time. I mean, vessels have video systems as well. Most of the companies that implement video system, DVR systems, by default never change the passwords, because who is gonna hack my video system? They wanna just see me. No, it's a part of your network. Once I get into your video system, I'm in the network. So I would say that every single piece of equipment is only to be activated access to if needed. It's simple to just send an email, make a call saying, unblock this port, we're going to come in, do a job, and lock us out again.
That makes sense, and that's certainly how we operate on our end, and how some other companies do. So it sounds like it takes a lot of people to make all this happen. But at the end of the day, it's really up to the end users on the vessel to open and close these doors and take responsibility for the network. I got a question from a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago about this, and so certainly Corey touched on the necessity for this stuff to be implemented on full ISM vessels, voluntary ISM vessels. But there's a lot of vessels that we deal with on a day-to-day basis that are either mini ISM or they don't have ISM at all. And certainly they'd like some guidance on this too. Is there a scaled down version of this, or what kind of advice would you give vessels that are, they just don't know where to start, but they'd like to provide the security to the boat without having to necessarily reach the standard set forth by a full ISM or even a mini ISM?
Sure, Eric, that's a really good question when it comes to those smaller vessels. So we actually have a client that we're working with right now. That's a private yacht that has no ISM. They're not commercial, but they still want to make sure that their networks are secure just from the cyber perspective. The owner comes on board, does work on the vessel, so they want to make sure that, hey, our vessel is secure. So we would recommend really the same thing. If you're a private owned vessel, it's always good to have a cybersecurity come on and do an assessment of your networks. And like I said, you may have the greatest IT company in the world who's doing a great job to keep devices running and things connected. Bring in someone from the outside to assess your network. And like I said, this is not, a $200,000 or $300,000 type of a deal to get an assessment done. It's fairly cost effective, but it's good, to do that a couple of times a year to see where are we at from the perspective of cyber health. Are things configured properly? Do we have things set up in order to allow outside access when it's needed, like Stefan just mentioned, which is extremely important? And then can we close the door? And there's a lot of things now enabled through technology that you can have a cybersecurity company or IT manage some of these things remotely. So it's great to be able to kind of get that biannual health checkup on your systems, so hey, where are the issues, where are the problems, with this? Is there crossover between the multiple networks, and just some of the things for the vessel to be able to understand? Because we tell people, hey, spend some money right now on cybersecurity, regardless of the type of vessel you are, because if you have an attack on your vessel, or the owner or someone that is on board, the cost could be 10 or 20 times that when it comes to the mitigation. And again, from an insurance perspective, you may not even be covered for a lot of that when it comes to cyber, because vessels just are not covered, and insurance companies right now are not providing that. Some of the P&I clubs I know are looking at that, but we still have a long way to go. And I think the prime movers for a lot of this to get done, whether you're an ISM vessel, you're a voluntary ISM, or you have no ISM, is going to be the insurance companies.
I'd like to add something to that. It actually, from an IT standpoint, it doesn't matter if your boat is this big or 100 something meters. So I always ask clients, and they say like, oh, I have nothing to lose, right? Does it hurt you if I take your money, if I take your private information and publish them? Or even, what about, most people don't think about, your reputation, right? If you have a good name out there and it gets to the public that you lost all your client information, or even worse, embarrassing private information about you, does it hurt you? So systems supposed to be secure, and everybody knows you can buy a computer today, you walk out of the store, 3 months later this thing is old. So technology is rapidly going more and more advanced, and stuff just becomes faster old than like 20 years ago. So you have to keep updating and keep staying secure. It doesn't matter which size of the vessel you have, because the technology that's being attacked is the same.
That's a really interesting point. I know we're kind of, back now into the open discussion side of it, but we've had a couple of clients reach out to us, and they have, 70-foot sport fishers where they have internet connectivity, and they do, say 2 or 3 days of fishing, and they have that internet connectivity for their clients, and they're like, hey, what can we do to be able to make sure that, that we're secure, our boat's secure, because there's a lot that we do, through the internet. So it's interesting, to your point, Stefan, is it really doesn't matter, the size of a vessel and the operations, and it's always good to do that kind of first step assessment, and what are you allowing on your vessel, and what devices are you not allowing, and how are things set up, and how's your firewall configured? A lot of times people say, well, cybersecurity just gets in the way of what we're trying to accomplish. We can't get the AV to work right. We can't get something into the master's or into the owner's stateroom, or the guests aren't happy. And I've always found, and Stefan, I'd love to hear from you on this, is when you configure everything properly from a cybersecurity perspective, the onboard IT systems, AV systems, if it's designed properly, are going to work great if you have it designed properly and managed properly.
If you know what you're doing, yes, it is doable. It's just is configuration, right? I mean, I have seen servers where people create 1,300 group policies because I made this policy, it didn't work, so I make this to make this work, and so it just says, and I was like, it seems like whoever set this up had no idea what they were doing. But there's something that is very, very critical, which most of the people do not know yet. It doesn't matter if you own a business or a private individual, or if you own a vessel, or even all. 2 months ago, the US government ruled it illegal and federal crime. If you get hacked and you pay ransom, you fund terrorism. So you're going to be under a federal crime. So, which people didn't understand, in January, when the big hack happened, that TravelX and Google and Microsoft, they all got hacked. And there will be millions paid to the Russian hackers. And I'm not sure what the money is used for, but if it's something bad, so you might even fund terrorists. So that's why the US government ruled it illegal. So if you think you pay, because you have the money, $50,000, $100,000 to get all your personal encrypted data back, you might find yourself later on investigated, and in worst case scenario, into jail. That's another part people are probably not aware of as of now.
I don't know how many of these panels I've seen or sat on over the years, Corey and Stefan, but this isn't exactly a new topic in the industry. And there's only, I think, so much of it's education, and this gets preached in and day out. But are you guys, I mean, on a realistic viewpoint, until IMO 2021 was really put into place, the incentive was, if we're not getting hurt, well, maybe we're just not going to think about it. But now you have actual regulations saying that they have to do that, which I think is a great step forward. Do you guys really foresee this? And maybe give me, obviously at some point, we hope to see all boats, following these protocols. What's, maybe a realistic time frame? You said that the Coast Guard is going to start these inspections, day one in January, and I think that you can't get all the boats. There's only so many people that do this kind of work, and you can't get them all up to snuff, so to speak, in a week. So do you guys have some thoughts on how long you think this will take to be implemented, and the kind of change we should expect to see? Because I imagine it's going to be a fairly evolutionary, a longer process.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Eric, and I completely agree with you. Is if we look at past IMO resolutions that have come forward into the flag state and the country and port state control enforcement, these things roll out over a pretty lengthy time period. Like ballast water was a pretty big deal, and it's something that the governments around the world are still trying to look at. What are we doing with this ballast water issue? And you're also looking at carbon emissions. These are issues that are into their almost second year or greater when it comes to the enforcement. And I think the underlying goal, and I've attended some of these IMO meetings in person in London, and the underlying goal is for the vessels and the facilities to be safer, so that there's not a loss of business that comes in from the cybercrime. Everybody recognizes that the biggest vulnerability right now is the cyber piece, and that's the hole to be able to close. And I just think from a good operational standpoint, vessels need to really do that assessment and look at a company that's a cybersecurity company, not an IT company, but a cybersecurity company that understands the the maritime side of it. And I think this is going to roll out over time, because the other piece here is how, when a port state control officer comes on board, whether it's the Coast Guard or it's someone in the Paris MOU or one of the other jurisdictional port state control MOUs around the world, how do they realistically assess your network? Well, the only way they can do it right now is, well, let us see your compliance certificate from your flag state. That's realistically, outside of looking at, hey, what are their passwords and usernames taped on and some of the other things, that's realistically the only way. So until law enforcement and port state control has tools to assess a network, I think this is going to be continuing to roll out over time. And the other thing that I will throw out there is I know that this is not kind of the beginning and the end when it comes to regulations. This is the beginning. And as we push forward, maybe not necessarily the IMO, but as everybody gets a better understanding of the cyber environment on board vessels and at maritime facilities, they're going to look at increasing regulations. And the U.S. Coast Guard has already done that. The Coast Guard put out earlier this year a NAVIC 0120, where they talk specifically about regulated facilities here in the United States being in compliance with cybersecurity regulations. So it's going to be really interesting to see, as this moves forward, how this is going to continue to evolve for vessels, but also regulated facilities around the world. And we're going to see, I think, more when it comes to ISPS and the enforcement of that, of facilities in different parts of the world and port state control. So I think this is just the very beginning when it gets to the regulatory climate.
Sure, and that's, like I said, that's what we're hoping to see. Obviously, it's a lot of work and it isn't going to change overnight, but we're really just, kind of hoping that people start chipping away, because I think to some extent this seems fairly insurmountable, especially to a vessel that's maybe never looked at this before. So I kind of just, we want to position it as such as, well, just start with an assessment and we can give you some basic things to try. Speaking of, sort of basic attacks, we've got a question here in regards to yachts using multiple credit cards and accessing them via email. Is that easier and less sophisticated, more common way to steal credit card info that can affect any vessel? And, certainly I can weigh in there a little bit, and that we see that. That's something that happens. Certainly, At the end of the day, we want to just get things done quickly. There's often a time issue with weather windows and wanting to get off the dock and trying to get everything done at the end of the day. So, the last, thought is, oh, well, let's just pay and get out of town. So we do see that sometimes. But Corey and Stefan, do you have thoughts on that?
So yes, and I also want to add something that you said earlier, Corey. So most of the time, emails can be intercepted if they're not encrypted, etc. And I have seen people sending password-protected documents with a credit card in there and send the password in the same email. So it is very common that you should not send any information that's sensitive without any protection in plain text or pictures of it out. When it comes to the enforcement of the regulations, I wanted to compare this to when HIPAA compliance changed in New York. I don't know how many individuals are in Manhattan owning a business, but once it changed, there were like 100,000 businesses charged with violations. So the question is, do you want to be one of the 100,000? How many they enforce doesn't matter. Do you want to be one of them that got enforced and get the punishment? But so I would not send any information anywhere if I wouldn't show it to a random stranger on a bus. That's what I tell people all the time. If it is sensitive for you, it doesn't matter what it is, put in a document, protect the document, and even if you send a phone call out, a text message on a separate kind of communication, so it's not all in the same boat in this case.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I just wanted to follow up real quick there, Corey, was, that's something we often do is if we're in an email exchange back and forth, just say, hey, call us. This is our number. Don't pick up if we call you, you call us, which I think has always kind of been the standard of to make sure you're not getting a phishing attack. So you guys do agree that, the credit cards over the phone aren't the worst thing in the world. I know here, once they're rang out, they're shredded and we never see them again. But we do run into issues because vessels, they want us to keep them on file, so we don't have to do that back and forth. Right.
There's secure ways to do that too, Eric. To be
absolutely
obviously keep that data on file. One of the things that we notice, and this happens quite a bit, is the man-in-the-middle attack. It's happened on boats and it's happened on facilities where we've seen someone intercept that email communication, take over as one of the parties, and then go about, okay, we're doing this for you, we're doing that for you. Okay, well, we're ready to pay the invoice, and then the person who's basically taken the identity will go and say, okay, well, you know what, our banking information has changed. If you could send the wire payment or ACH to this bank info, that would be great. When you see that should be an immediate red flag. I've been involved in a number of companies. I've owned a number of my own businesses, and I know one thing that does not change very often is our banking information. So if you've been dealing with someone, say like Bluewater Books and Charts, and all of a sudden you get an email that says, hey, our banking information has changed, pick up the phone, take the 30 seconds to give Bluewater a call and say, listen, we're getting ready to pay this invoice. We just got an email that your banking information has changed. Is that correct? And it could be, yep, our banking information has, and that's a great confirmation. But 90% of the time you're going to find when someone says the banking information has changed or wire it to this and you don't call, it's most likely a man-in-the-middle attack. And I've seen millions of dollars lost in the large yacht industry just on its own with man-in-the-middle attacks, and that is completely not recoverable. You're never going to see that back. And a lot of times you could have exclusions in your insurance policy that's also not going to be covered because you didn't do some sort of two-step authentication. So take the 20 seconds. If you're really busy, have someone else on the boat do it. If the captain and first officer is really busy, say, hey, is there anybody else who can make that quick call for us to confirm that this banking information is good? And I also recommend that with companies. If you're doing B2B with another company and they, shoot you an email and say, oh, well, our banking information has changed, take the 30 seconds to give them a call and just to confirm that.
Well, as an employee here, I can assure everybody that it's not the top of our list to change our banking information once or twice a year. That's a bit of a pain, and we don't do it. I can't imagine a lot of companies do that often. I'm going to give Corey, you and Stefan, if there's any kind of closing remarks you guys would like to give or anything else you'd like to add, that would be a great time to do that.
I would say when it's IT, right? Ask questions. The number one thing when people ask me, like, what should I do? Ask. do your research who you work with. Like, a lot of people find a cheap guy that I got from Craigslist, and you don't even know if the guy has any reputation. I mean, we are advisors. I'm not coming to your house to take away a cigarette. I'm not your doctor, right? If something is unhealthy, you have to be responsible. So do your research about the person and the reputation, and then have paperwork signed, have agreements, NDAs, and at the end of the day, when the job is done, ask for a documentation that if the person leaves the country, gets hit by a bus, whatever, that the next person knows exactly what has been done. Get a network documentation about everything and keep it confidential.
It's great advice. Corey, anything you'd like to add?
I would wholeheartedly agree with Stefan. Is number one, ask questions. When you go to a shipyard, when you go to that marina, when you ask, your normal security questions, or even before you get there, add cybersecurity to that list. What kind of cybersecurity do you have on your network? Am I going to be able to get on your network and see everybody else who's on that network? And make sure you understand, the type of vulnerabilities that you have on board. Even if you're connected into an unsecured network, through good cybersecurity health and through that assessment, you can understand where your vulnerabilities are, patch those up. So even if there's a problem with the internet connection, the inbound may not be as secure, you can make sure that once it hits your boat and everything past that is going to be secure. And for us, it always starts with the assessment. Assess and do a realistic assessment. Assess what are the true vulnerabilities and what are those critical items and those big items that we need to take care of. And if you do that and have the system configured properly, it's going to work much better for you, for your owner, for your guests, and however your operations go.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense. And speaking of questions, some magical wizard behind the curtain, I think, has put our contact information above and below our heads. So if you do have more questions, please feel free to email us. And if one of us doesn't know the answer, we can probably find someone who does. I know we've given a lot of information out today, and we really hope that we've kind of just given a broad overview of what the IMO 2021 compliance on cybersecurity looks like. We hope that we've given you some thoughts about what you might do from whatever portion of the industry to secure your side of the operation, and some things that you need to ask the other people, because we're all participating in this big sandbox they call the internet together. And it seems though we all have our own responsibilities. And yeah, ask questions. So please feel free to reach out to us. We really appreciate everybody's time and patience with our slow start to the last seminar. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Please reach out. We'd love to hear from you.